You guys,
Perfect.
you need a selfie stick or something.
You can hold it all the session.
Okay, so this one says, it's the one that says, suppose a U.S. firm believes it may be able to develop a new vaccine for a dangerous tropical disease. If it succeeds, it believes the annual private sector demand for the vaccine in the U.S. would be given by P equals 2,600 minus 52. And it would be able to produce the vaccine at a total cost given by 200 Q. Okay. Assuming the firm is able to develop the vaccine and sells it only in the U.S., what price would it charge and what quantity would it produce each year during the time it's monopolist, and what profit will it earn? Okay. As a hint, Q is between 20 and 30. So you could just start out tackling this problem by starting at the top of the table and putting in 20 for Q, and you get 1,600. And then if you put in 21, it's going to be $50 less because the slope is 50. Okay. Yeah. So, and so the thing that is true about these problems that you can take advantage of is that these demand curves that usually show up in the problem are usually linear, and that means that once you figured out the slope and you got the hang of it, you can fill in the table without using your calculator. Probably good to check periodically. We should need to get off. Okay. Then you can fill in total revenue. Okay. So I'm just going to demonstrate how you could pick a few points, right? So I calculated a couple of them. I can see total revenue is going up. We can calculate total cost, profit. So that's, so total cost again is very straightforward. Just $200 higher. Okay. And then profit is different. Now, remember, when you're thinking about tricks and filling in the table, that if the thing is linear, and you know it's linear, you can take advantage of that. Okay, but some of these things are not linear. Total revenue is not linear in Q, and so don't look at the first two and then start filling in the table. Total revenue is actually, because P depends on Q, and total revenue is P times Q, it's actually quadratic in Q. Okay, so here you have to calculate it out. Now for the sake of argument, I will skip one, because I can look over here and I can see, ooh, profits are going up. Let's see how fast. Showing what would happen if I just skipped a couple of these. So I'm skipping one row there. And I can see profits are still going up, so the one I skipped is not a problem, because I would have wanted to skip it, my profits are higher. Okay, 1,400. That one's better too. So far, 0.4 is the winning number. Then if I go a little further, I get to a point that profits are going down. And so we have our winner. Okay. So the right key is 24, the right fee is 1,400. And the profit is 28. Okay, so if the firm goes ahead and it invents this product, then it's going to make that every year. Any questions about that? Can you hold exam? Do you like that? No, that's not. Okay? Someone's wallet is here and it's making me really nervous that they're, so, Philip, do you want your wallet back or does it need to be here? Whenever there's an extra wallet around it, it's scary that somebody's going to get locked out. Okay, so that's all there was to question 6. Okay. So question 7. Okay. So that's using the part that we were talking about at the end of the class, thinking about what total costs are like and what amount of things to choose out. Okay. Question 7 says, now suppose that a research project would need to be undertaken to develop the vaccine, and it would cost $400,000 in year 0. But there's only a 40% chance that the project would succeed. You can assume that it could be carried out in year 0, and if it succeeds, the profits for 6 would begin in year 1. The firm would be a monopolist for 20 years, after which other people get to enter the market. The price would fall to $200 and the firm's profits would drop to 0. Please calculate the expected net present. Please calculate the expected net present value. Okay? So far so good? Okay. So this is a yes/no decision about whether to go ahead with the project. Okay, so the important thing to do is to start with the decision tree. And if the firm doesn't do the project, they don't pay anything for research, but they don't get to be a monopolist, so their net payoff is 0. If they do the project, the project either succeeds or it fails. And if it succeeds, the cash flow that goes with that endpoint for having undertaken the project and having it work is that, where this is all in thousands now. So by undertaking the project, they pay $400,000 because the project succeeds. They get this profit each year. And if it fails, then the cash flow looks like that. Right? There's a $400,000 payment in year 0, and the game is over. Okay. 5%, so. Oops. And it doesn't go on forever. I should have that in my cash flow. Goes out to your 20. So I need this finite stream formula. And when you calculate that out, it's $359,000. So in this calculation, if the firm does the project and it succeeds, they end up with a payoff of minus $41,000. So it's not even a good payoff if it succeeds. Okay? And if they do the project and it fails, it's minus 400. Okay, so the problem asks you to calculate the expected net present value, so you can't just stop there and say, no firm would want to do this. You actually have to calculate out the answer. Which is helpful later on. And so the EV of this is minus $256,000. So the firm's decision, if we simplify the tree all the way back to the root node, is between getting a payoff of 0 and getting a payoff with an expectation of minus $256,000. So doing nothing is the best choice. Any questions about that?
This might be a silly question, but in the formula, the present value formula, why is it 1 minus 1 over 1.5? Sometimes it's plus, and so make sure.
In this one?
Yeah.
In this particular formula, it will always be minus, right? Because this is the finite stream formula.
Okay.
Another way to remember it is, which in some sense I prefer, but myself, is to remember that the finite stream looks like an incident stream minus the cutoff part you don't get. And that's why it's got that negative sign.
Okay.
So in terms of stuff to understand, you can actually get away perfectly well in this exam. Like the 3 formulas. Actually, I'll show you that one of them. One of them is the basic formula, the second one is this, and the third one is the delayed infinite stream, and you can build the finite stream out of it if you need to. Okay, so part 1 was this proper maximization. Part 2 is this EV calculation. There's a formula to do this with the project. No. Let's see unasked questions. You want to ask them? Okay, so potential life-saving drug not carried out. Research is.
Is this a common occurrence?
Yeah. So at the very end of this problem, it says, I think it says, by the way, what this is the orphan disease problem. So what we're going to see, what we're going to see when we go through this problem is that this is a disease which doesn't have enough customers in the U.S. to make it worth somebody developing this. But when you look in the developing world too, it will have huge benefits. And so there's more to come. Okay.
That's the cost. That's the PV cost.
Okay, so part 8 says, now let's consider the research project from a global perspective. Suppose there's a second market for the vaccine outside the US, call this the rest of the world market, and suppose it has a demand curve given by uh, 300 minus 0.01 QR, where QR is the amount of the vaccine that's sold in the rest of the world. Okay, so just looking at this, what's going to be true about this demand curve? It's going to be steep or flat? It's going to be very flat. Okay. It's going to be very flat, and that's going to mean that there's potentially lots and lots of people who will benefit from this vaccine. Okay. All right. During the patent period, the firm only sells in the U.S. and QR is 0. After the patent expires and the price drops to 200, sales to the rest of the world begin. If the firm undertook the research and succeeded in developing the vaccine, so occasionally people in the heat of the moment during the exam get really panicky about exactly what it says. Okay, so in this one it says, if the firm undertook the research and succeeded in developing the vaccine, sometimes people come up to me and they say, but the last problem, I just worked out that the firm wouldn't undertake the research. Right? That's okay, there's an if. If they did, okay, and succeeded in developing the vaccine, what is the present value of consumer surplus in each market? Please continue using the 5% interest rate from 7. Okay. And then calculate the expected NPV of consumer surplus. Okay, so to do this problem, and this is why I wanted to be sure that we tackle this one first, so that everybody can ask questions while you're fresh. To do this, you have to draw 3 different market diagrams and compute the consumer surplus. One's going to be in the U.S. during the patent period. The second one is going to be in the U.S. after the patent period. And the third one is going to be in the rest of the world after the patent period. So in the U.S. during, the demand curve starts with an intercept of 2,600. That's the maximum. And we're after consumer surplus. Okay. So in addition to the demand curve, what else do you need to know? Take heterogeneity. So, what else do you need to know to compute consumer surplus?
Supply curve?
The supply curve would help, but if you think back to the beginning of the semester when I really twisted your arm about this, to be safest in computing consumer surplus, don't worry about supply, only worry about the things that the buyers care about, which is what?
Willingness to pay.
The price. The price. Willingness to pay, which is in here, is the buyers. So that, they care about the demand curve, and they care about the price. What is the price?
$300. Well, they,
1,400. Okay, so the monopolist price, which you worked out in an earlier part of the problem, drops right in here. That's what people pay during the monopoly period. Okay. And the number of units that you choose, you could get by going back to the demand curve and putting 1,400 in, or you could just look. What is it? It's 24. We already calculated that because the monopolist had to do it as part of the profit maximization.
If you made a mistake in the previous question, but carried that mistake over throughout, is that,
Yeah,
would you
so
realize it here, or?
You'd end up with a lot of CONS written on your exam.
Okay.
If you haven't seen it before, is how I mark that. And so, so in general, don't worry deeply about this, because if you made a mistake and these numbers are off, but you carried your numbers through to here, I will do the calculation, and you should have done using your numbers and grading on that. The only time I would count, I count that as a really, I would count off the first time, and I wouldn't count off again here, unless what you did erases the problem. So like if you make a mistake earlier and you conclude that the firm's optimal price is $2,800, and you get to here and you go, geez, Wilcox, and there's no consumer surplus at all, zero, right? I won't say, well, that's fully consistent with what you did. I'll think, you guys are graduate students and highly talented, you should have realized that's probably not the answer to this problem. Okay, so as long as you don't eradicate the problem or blow it up in some way, you only get knocked once for that. Okay. You do, however, have to remember that consumer surplus is that. Okay, so. Okay, so you calculate that. And that is $14,400. That's the consumer's, so $14,400, if you were gonna describe this number fully, is what?
$14,400 is the amount of additional benefit that consumers will receive by participating in
Yeah,
this market.
yeah, I did ask one question for it, so that's absolutely true, this is the benefit, the net benefit that consumers get above. So the monopoly is attracting these very high prices, but people are still benefiting. But what I mean is, are we done? We're not done, because this is only consumer surplus for 1 year. Okay. So the next step is to calculate the present value, right? So if the firm goes ahead and it does this, it's going to provide $1,400 of consumer surplus every year for 20 years. And that turns out to be $179,000. Okay. So the steps in tackling this are to carry forward what you know about what the monopoly in the monopoly period, calculate the consumer surplus in each year, and then take into account that the monopoly period lasts 20 years, so the present value of all the consumer surplus will be a lot bigger. So far, so good?
Question. Do you have a rule for how you want us to round when we have more complicated formulas like this, like how much or how little should we be rounding?
Well, you know, this is a little bit more art than science, but if you round to one part in 100, you're safe, right? Like so rounding this to 179 or 180 or 178 is fine. I would strongly prefer you not round this to 200,000, right? So, you know, so you don't have to carry everything around, but try to keep 3 digits. Probably pretty good. Sometimes you were a little aggressive on that one. And where you want to be sure not to be too aggressive is in the earlier stages, right? Because if you round this one a lot, roughly speaking, the rounding error is going to get multiplied by 20. So, you know, a little too aggressive, you could actually change the problem. Okay, other questions? All right, now this is the U.S. Attorney. now we can calculate the consumer surplus after. So, same demand curve, because we're just looking at the US for now. What's the price after? 200. Okay? And then you have to go back to the demand curve to figure out what the quantity is, because that wasn't chosen by the monopolist. Okay, so now the consumer surplus is going to be that whole triangle. So that turns out to be $57.6 thousand. Okay, and then what do I need to do next?
An infinite string?
What?
Would this be an infinite string?
It would be an infinite string, and now
The delayed start.
it would start, yeah, so it's a delayed start. So this doesn't happen until year 21. It's only after the patent expires. And so it's a delayed start infinite string. Is that getting too hard to read? I could go get a darker pen. Okay, so this is the PV of that, and the answer is 434K.
Wait,
So, yeah, so. So the total consumer surplus to people in the US, both during and after the patent period, is $613,000. But we're not done, because now we have to take into account the rest of the world folks. So the rest of the world is going to pay through, yeah.
sorry, you're keeping the US portion of the patent before and after the patent separate? When do you combine them?
You could combine, you could keep it separate and combine all three pieces. In this problem, there's no requirement that you distinguish between them. Now, there is a reason why I did it this way.
Okay.
The reason, it's not important in this problem, but occasionally when you look at other problems, you might see that, suppose the US government is concerned about this problem, and is worried about consumer surplus to people in the US, but then you might wanna, like in this problem, it would turn out that there would be some policies that the US government might wanna undertake just to help people in the US that would have the effect of getting the firm to undertake this project, and then possibly produce the number that we're gonna compute as a benefit for the rest of the world, just as a side effect. So in this problem, there was no need to calculate that at some intermediate step, but just kind of keep an eye out for the problem, what's gonna come along later. Did that clear things up or make it confusing?
So I guess like the go-to takeaway is just to always separate all of the different periods. There's no
Well,
need to combine them.
You for sure need to think carefully about how many different periods there are, so, or how many different markets. So here we have the US with the monopoly, US after the monopoly, the rest of the world after the monopoly. You could conceivably have the rest of the world during the monopoly period too. Now in this particular problem, if I given you the demand curve that underlies this, and I said, what's the profit for selling the drug in the rest of the world during the monopoly period? What would these guys buy? Well, this is a digression. The main point I was getting at is if the monopolist wants to charge something that's like on the order of $1,400, nobody in the rest of the world is going to be able to afford it. So anyway, keep track of the markets. Okay. So now we've got to figure out, we know what price we're going to charge. We don't know Q. And so okay, but we can do the same thing that you guys did a lot earlier in the semester, and we just did a minute ago. We can just put in that 200, P, 200 and calculate what Q is. And when you do that, what you get is 10,000 doses. So the rest of the world demand curve is flatter and lower, but it's very elastic. So the consumer surplus is 1/2 of 10,000 times 100. Okay. And that is $500,000. Okay. Per year. So
In the CS equation we use for reference is 10,000 minus 300 minus 100, or 10,000 times 300
oh,
minus
this should be
100.
300 minus 200. Yeah, sorry. I just read that. Okay. So $500,000. But nobody gets that until year 21. So the present value of it is given by that expression, and that turns out to be $3,769,000. Okay, so we were talking earlier about rounding, and in some sense I said you can be flexible about that, just don't round too much. one strong piece of advice that I have is when you're setting up a problem, if you started out like doing this problem in thousands, stick with thousands even when the numbers suddenly become much bigger, right? So this is actually, I could have written this. 3.769 million, and if you're using a calculator and scientific notation, it will do that for you. But you run the risk, if you're not really paying attention to where the decimal point is, that when you put it into here, you're putting it as 3 rather than 3,000. So just as a tactical matter, it's better to kind of stick on one set of units when you can. Okay, total consumer surplus if the firm does the research project and it works. Okay. All right, now. Now the problem asks you to calculate this and then to report the expected consumer surplus. So we know that there's the 40% chance this is going to work, 60% chance it's going to fail. And you only get the consumer surplus if the project succeeds. So the expected consumer surplus is 40% chance of that payoff, a 60% chance of zip. And that turns out to be, when you calculate it out, $1,753,000, or $1.7 million. That's the expected consumer surplus for this product in the world if the firm were to go ahead with trying the project.
So what that number is saying is that the expected value is 17, or is $1.7-ish million, or the expected value of consumer surplus if the company makes the, which is make the drug.
This is the expected consumer surplus if they try the research project. So what's the cost of trying a research project?
$400,000.
So somebody who's concerned about consumer surplus rather than their profits, would they want to do the research project?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not even close, right? Not even close. That's $400,000 cost. The expected payoff is more than 4 times that, so pretty large. Yeah. But that's not, the question doesn't ask about just what's the expectancy is.
So, so since the 3 markets looked at were the rest of the world, after the patent, the US patent, and the US during the patent, I get that I was just a question asked for that, but just a problem like this, but slightly different. An example, is it that like will there be a world market during the patent period, or is it just a US market?
The problem will be specific about that.
Okay.
And so to be clear, you will not necessarily get the orphan drug or the orphan disease problem on your exam. Right? But the problem will be specific about if there's a monopolist, who the monopolist sells to. That will be very specific. Okay. Conceivably, the monopolist might sell in 2 markets. You just have to take that into account. But it will say. The other thing is that when you go to look at older exams, okay, in older exams when there were problems like this question would have said a slightly different thing. So question A would have given you the same information, and then it would have said, if the firm undertook the research and succeeded in developing a vaccine, what is the present value of all the consumer surplus that would be generated? Okay. This version of the problem gives you some hints, right? It says what is it in each market and stuff like that. So when you go back, there are similar problems, that require the same steps. They're less explicit about what we need to do. Now, you can probably infer why it has changed over the years, right? Well, it's changed over the years because without a little structure, sometimes people got to this question. And I want you to realize you're in court.
So that right number right there is the consumer surplus, not the expected profits.
Right. This is the expected consumer surplus, including both markets in the period before and after the patent. Okay, it's not the profits. Now we're going to move on to the last part, which is, so what the problem has shown so far is that the firm clearly doesn't want to do this activity. Society clearly wants the firm to do the activity. So the last part, which we're going to go through, is thinking about a policy that could fix that problem. All right, so okay, so then it says, finally, suppose a philanthropist concerned about consumer surplus in the rest of the world wants to encourage research on the problem by offering cash prize of X dollars to the firm if it successfully develops the vaccine. Okay. So there's already a patent system in place, it's not doing the job, so we need an add-on policy. The prize would be a single payment delivered in year 0. The firm would earn the monopoly profit as usual in periods 1 to 20 if the firm does not undertake the research project or undertakes it and fails, it gets nothing. Okay. What is the minimum value of X that would induce the firm to undertake the project? Okay. So the calculus, we just have to go back and look at the firm's problem. If it doesn't undertake the project, it gets nothing because they're not getting any payment from the philanthropist for not trying. The philanthropist's offer doesn't change the possible outcomes or the probabilities, right? If the firm undertakes the project, it's still 40% chance of succeeding and a 60% chance of failing. Okay. The monopolist's offer doesn't change the cost of the project itself. That's still $400,000. And it doesn't change the monopoly profit from before. So the firm's payoff, if it does the project and the project works, is the payoff it got before plus the prize that it gets from the monopolist. Okay? So if you just kind of take this one step at a time, you don't have to redo any of these calculations. The monopoly profit and everything is just the same as it was before. The cost of doing the project is just the same. The only difference is we get this X. And then if the project fails, under this policy, the firm gets nothing. Okay? If you look at other exams, you'll see things like this where the firm gets a payoff whether or not the project succeeds just for undertaking it. So it could be a little different. But here, this is a prize, not a subsidy for the effort. Prizes in some areas are kind of invoked as a policy tool. They can often be very powerful in giving people incentives to do something. And also, the thing that's nice about this for the person offering is that they don't have to pay unless it works. Right? So you're changing the firm's payoffs, but in an interesting way. Right?
So on the foundation side, they would do a similar calculation to see if they could actually fund, to see what types of prizes to offer.
So we're going to get that. We're going to get that in a second. So what we're doing in the grand scheme of things is we're figuring out what the firm's willingness to accept is to undertake this project. Okay, it's not phrased that way. It's just how big does the prize have to be. But at a deep level, it's how much do they have to get in order to be willing to try this? And what we're gonna do is follow up with that and say, what would the philanthropist be willing to pay? And if it's more than willingness to accept, there's gain for trade, and it goes up.
So then it's, whatever the number is for the prize, it would be something that the company would find large enough to compel them to try, even though there's a good chance they lose a great deal of money.
Well, that's what we're gonna calculate here. So for them to be willing to take this branch, that expected payoff has to be at least 0, okay? So, what we have to do is what we have to do is we have to calculate what the expected value is, and it turns out when you multiply this out, you get minus 256K. Okay, and if you were like totally lined up on this project, you would have been able to see that that was already going to be there, because that's the firm's expected payoff from undertaking a research project with no subsidy. Okay. So it's the same number as before, but there's a 40% chance they get the prize. Okay. And so what we have to do is find out the x that makes that equal to 0. And that turns out to be $641,000. So, okay, so that's what the price has to be to induce the firm to go ahead.
We would always start at 0 in order to be able to solve this.
Well, you want to compare this branch to whatever the payoff was here.
Okay.
Okay, so it might not be 0. So if you imagine that the problem is slightly different, where the firm was thinking about 2 different drug development projects, let's say a conservative one and then this one that would help the rest of the world, one that just helps people in the US. It might be that the better alternative is to do the other project and has a positive payoff. And so then to get them to do this, you have to find an X that's bigger than some positive number. Okay, now the last piece is, does the philanthropist gain enough from this to go ahead? So if the philanthropist puts money into this, there's a 40% chance of success. If the project succeeds, the monopolist gets a huge payoff because they like, what the promise is they care about the rest of the world see us. They get a huge payoff from that. But that's not the end of the story. What else happens if this branch occurs? From the philanthropist's point of view.
They
From Bill
lose.
Gates' point of view.
You have to minus the 400 that they. No.
Right idea, but different number.
Oh.
It's the 640.
Right.
But they had to put up this prize, and now they're going to have to fork it over. Okay, so the monopolist or the philanthropist payoff if the project succeeds is that, and if the project fails, what's the philanthropist's payoff? 0, right? Because they don't get any consumer surplus, but they also don't have to pay the prize. So the EV the EV to the philanthropist is more than $1 million. Okay, so this what this says is that the philanthropist's willingness to pay for this is well above the cost of the policy, and it would be good to go ahead with it. And that's all there is to this complicated box. Now, I'm gonna take a moment, I'm gonna go get a dark pen, and I also have to get a charger for my iPod. You guys can think about what you wanna talk about next, I'll be right back.